Pastor Mark Hitchcock is pastor of Faith Bible Church in Edmond, Oklahoma. He's been a very frequent conference speaker of mine and radio guest as well. Mark Hitchcock, welcome back to the program.
It's great to be with you.
Thank you. Say, and going back to my introduction, where I made a reference and a quote from you, do you believe we are on the home stretch of the church age?
Well, I believe we are. Of course, we don't know how long the home stretch is, and consider the home stretch is 5 years or it's 10 years, but I believe that we are. I believe we're in the season of the Lord's coming, and, of course, no one knows the day or the hour, no one knows the decade, but we do see these things that are happening in our world, and so I think, when we look at the Bible and look at what's happening in our world today, it's kind of like the illustration I've heard before of when you get ready to put together a puzzle, you look at the picture on the top of the box, and that's, of course, what the ultimate scenario will look like, or what the puzzle will look like when it's completely put together. And when we look at our world today, more and more of what we see in our world is looking like the picture on top of the box. Now, we're not there yet. There are a lot of events that have to be fulfilled in the end times, but I think a lot of these pieces are coming together, and what we see is beginning to look more and more like that. So I do believe that we are in the home stretch of the church age.
The rise of ISIS, and of course that's a heavy theme in your new book, ISIS, Iran, Israel, and the End of Days. So the rise then of ISIS probably was not a huge surprise to you. It was not to me. Many of my radio guests, and of course I can kind of see this myself, that global destabilization, let's just say more global destabilization, is necessary to continue setting the stage, correct?
Well, it is. The Bible tells us that ultimately, in the end times, the staging grounds from the events will be in the Middle East. Mm-hmm. So the whole rise of ISIS just keeps the world focus riveted on the Middle East, which is exactly what we should expect if the Lord's coming is near. Obviously, Israel is in the center of all of that, and that's the reason the Middle East is so significant. But I think, obviously just the world focus on the Middle East. The Bible tells us, too, I believe, that the tribulation period, this coming 70th week of Daniel, it's often called the time of Jacob's trouble, that final 7 years of this age will begin with a peace treaty, some type of peace agreement between a final great world ruler and the nation of Israel. Well, obviously that peace treaty, what we see now, it's desperately needed up there. It's just chaos. And so I think a lot of these things are just kind of, again, just propelling us kind of down the road.
Yes, and my intent is to ask you how you feel some of this fits into Bible prophecy, because you cover it wonderfully here, and that's in my notes, and we're heading there in just a minute or two. Let me continue to try to set the stage here, because you give an interesting story here in the book, because you actually were in Israel, and you talk about the brutal reality of ISIS becoming personal to you. Now, they didn't capture you and cut your head off, thankfully, because you're here with us today. But talk to us about what happened to you in Israel.
Well, back in the spring of 2015, a group from our church, we took 86 people from our church who went over to Israel. I've been there before. I think it was my third or fourth trip to go to Israel. And on our final day in Galilee up in northern Israel, we went up to as groups often do, we went up to the Syria-Israeli border up in the area known as the Golan Heights. And we were standing there about 100 yards or so, something like that, from a fence that marks the border there. And, groups go there all the time. In fact, it's kind of a weird scene because you have all these things happening up there, and you have people selling trinkets and all kinds of things because the visitors come there in the land of Israel to see the border there. But while we were there, we were hearing explosions in the distance, and they were kind of getting closer. So you have just these thundering explosions going on, and there was a village just right across from us there, and our guide told us that just a few weeks earlier he'd been there, and a terrible firefight had broken out, and the group he was with watched this happen right in front of them.
Wow.
And this town was taken by ISIS. And, of course, we're there, and these explosions are going off over there, and it's kind of unnerving and unsettling to the people who are there. Some of them are fairly close, and they shake the ground as you're standing there. And, it was just a strange experience. I know we often use the word surreal. Word gets overused, but it was definitely surreal, standing there, just looking a few hundred yards across over there to a town that had been taken by ISIS. Here we are standing there safe and sound, and, again, there's people selling snacks and trinkets kind of all around us. It was just a strange setting, but it really brought home to me the fact, this is real. It seems so far away when we're back here in the United States, but the poor people in that village and in those places, they're trapped really in this cauldron. it just reinforced that. And of course, suddenly, of course, what happens in San Bernardino, it happens in our own country, and I think tragically it's going to begin to hit here with more frequency. But it really brought it home to me how real it is.
Yeah, and I want to talk about that coming to America, but as you're talking there and describing what happened to you, look how close it is to the only democracy in the Middle East. It's yards to just a few miles away from Israel.
Oh, that's right. No, it's right there. It's right there on their border. Sure, and they live with that all the time. Of course, they're surrounded basically on every side. But
yes.
So really nothing, probably not new to them, but it was just strange, a group of Americans standing there witnessing this. It really was. It was something kind of for all of our group. It was probably one of the most powerful moments on our trip, and it was not something that was orchestrated.
You're listening to Understanding the Times Radio. I'm Jan Markell. I have on the line Dr. Mark Hitchcock because we're carrying his newest book, ISIS, Iran, Israel, and the End of Days. You can find it in my store, olivetreeviews.org, views as in viewpoint. You can give us a call. It's in my print newsletter. You might want to sign up for that. We've actually featured it in a couple of e-newsletters. And again, I can't always read these products cover to cover, but I did this one because every page is so pertinent to our times, and it's talking about, I guess, the storm to come. And Mark actually says, Paris, well over a year ago, was the first of the storm. Obviously, there's been Belgium, there's been San Bernardino. Will be many, many more of these. So, Mark, what were your thoughts as you saw the first of the storm? I mean, that can go back to Paris. I mean, for that matter, it can go back to 9/11. But what were your thoughts when you saw the first of the storm?
Well, of course, going back to 9/11, something that just, kind of shattered our whole nation, kind of shattered the psyche of our country, this idea that we're kind of invincible here and nothing like that could ever come to America. I think that shattered kind of that sense that we're separated from these kinds of things. What's happening in Europe, I think in Paris, as you begin to see ISIS and these ISIS-motivated groups. A couple of things I thought of. One, obviously, is that how these groups can have such a far reach so quickly. They're how barbaric they are, and they have no concern for life. But also, too, it just made me think of really how, I don't know what word I want to use, naive, I guess, maybe is the best word, that many Western countries are about these kinds of things, that they just continue to allow people to come in unvetted, I guess you'd say. I mean, just people are living among them that they have no idea really what they have on their hands. I think Europe is in for a bloodbath at some point in time. I do. I think that there are thousands of people there waiting to strike, and I fear for there. But I think eventually that could be here as well. What happens there can obviously come to our own country. So I think it's just the beginning, again, of a lot of chaos. And I'm not hoping that happens. Believe me, I pray every day that these plans will be thwarted and that these enemies will not be able to carry out their attacks. But I'm just being realistic about what I think will happen. And it's a tragic thing that's happening. But obviously the people to blame are these ISIS monsters who are carrying these things out. But I think they're, in many ways, leaders in some of these countries are complicit in the fact that they're not taking it seriously enough.
Well, let me play a quick soundbite, and you quote Joel Rosenberg frequently in your book, and Joel is quite a commentator on our times when it comes to Mideast issues. He calls it the epicenter, of course, and he makes the same comment you've just made, is where on earth are our Western leaders when it comes to understanding, comprehending, and fighting back?
One of the reasons I wrote the novel was to warn people, to show people that if we don't deal decisively and crush ISIS in the Middle East, it's coming. It's coming to Europe. It's coming to the United States. It's coming to Israel. Israel, of course, just this week captured an ISIS cell in the West Bank. They are not, the Islamic State is not interested in being contained to Syria and Iraq. It sees itself as building a regional caliphate or Islamic kingdom, and eventually a global kingdom. And it will kill anyone that gets in its way.
Well, we're already seeing some of that spreading to Indonesia. And recently, I know in the Philippines, in South Philippines, Mindanao, where there are many militant Muslims there, MILF and so forth, they're claiming allegiance to ISIS.
ISIS is the new radical Islamic brand. They have come on so fast, so strong. I mean, they're literally, I believe it's a demonic movement. I mean, they're not just terrorizing people. They're engaged in genocide in Syria and Iraq. They're trying to eliminate Christianity from those two countries. And they're slaughtering Muslims by the tens of thousands. And what's happening is Al-Qaeda is looking like the moderates. They are denouncing ISIS for chopping off people's heads, for crucifying people. Al-Qaeda is denouncing ISIS for being too radical. Now, we've entered a bizarre universe when Al-Qaeda is positioning itself as the reasonably sane, in their view, version. But the fact that ISIS has moved so fast, captured 45% of the nation of Iraq, is indicative of its danger. The people being drawn to it are much more bloodthirsty than other, even radical Islamic terrorists. More radical than Hamas, although it's in the same category, more radical than Hezbollah. And I'm concerned that Western leaders, including our president, are simply too complacent.
And Mark Hitchcock, the thing that jumped out at me was Joel Rosenberg calls the movement demonic. I think that's very accurate.
Yes, I mean, there's no doubt about that, what they do. Mm-hmm. And we know that Satan knows the end of the story as well in the Bible. Sure. And we know that he, of course, is trying to bring about chaos, and ultimately his goal is to wipe out the Jewish people, I believe. And of course, ISIS, they've told the Jewish people, the Jewish state, Israel, you're next. You're the ultimate prize or the ultimate goal. So in that sense, they're just another one of these demonically inspired movements to ultimately try to wipe out the Jewish people.
Yeah, and I get concerned when I hear some of our leaders, including Barack Obama, use the term ISIL. I mean, that's simply the L in ISIL stands for the Levant, which includes Israel. And I'm concerned that's a signal of some kind to Iran that they're okay with whatever Iran wants to do to Israel. I don't know if you've given that any thought at all, why some are using ISIS and others are using ISIL, but the L stands for the Levant, which includes Israel.
No, that's right. I mean, I don't know why President Obama, he's the only one I ever hear that calls him ISIL. Everybody else, it's ISIS, the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria. Of course, that's where their main territory is. But yeah, the Levant, of course, he may be stating that is their ultimate goal, is to take the entire Levant, not just Syria. It includes Lebanon, Israel, all the way down. So, but I don't know why he calls them that, because I think sometimes when he says ISIL, I think there's probably a lot of people that don't even know what he's talking about. That may be why he says it some ways too, because the average person doesn't even know what ISIL is. They've just heard ISIS. So yeah, I don't know why he keeps using that moniker for them instead of the accepted one. It is strange.